Hello, this is cjhoyle. Today is Saturday, April 18th, 2020, and I'm standing at the intersection of Lake Shore Boulevard and Strachan Avenue, just across from the Princess Gates of Exhibition Place. Today I'm riding my Linear Limo Recumbent Bike, which has an action camera mounted on the front of it, and in this video I'm going to be riding east and filming part 2 of my tour of Lake Shore Boulevard here in Toronto. Alright, so picking up from where I left off last week, here I'm beginning my way heading in the east direction, heading towards the downtown core of Toronto. Over on the right, that park is called Coronation Park. And we're just approaching Fort York Boulevard, which is a road that sort of curves and then goes parallel to Lake Shore Boulevard, a little bit north of it. Over on the left you can see a structure sort of in the median there. That's called the Queen's Wharf Lighthouse. It was once one of 2 lighthouses that guided boats into the Toronto Harbour. Back before there was a western channel of the harbour, all the boats had to come in from the eastern side. Now that lighthouse has been relocated from its original location, because as you can see it's not next to the water anymore, but even if it was in its original location, I don't believe it would be next to water anymore, because they've infilled a lot of this area of the downtown core and extended it further out into the harbour. Just crossing Stadium Road. And this next intersection up ahead is Bathurst Street. A few weeks ago I filmed a tour similar to this one, where I rode down Bathurst Street, first starting from Bloor and ending about a block or so to the south of here. So if I was to turn right, we'd eventually get to the Toronto Island Airport, or the Billy Bishop Airport, or whatever they're calling it these days. And that's pretty close to where I ended that other video that I made. Straight ahead you can see the CN Tower, or a little bit to the left I suppose, but it's kind of being blocked behind another building right now. You can also see a little part of the white roof closer to the ground, which is part of the Sky Dome, or the Rogers Centre, where the Toronto Blue Jays play. The road we're crossing here is called Dan Leckie Way. And that structure that you can see over on the left, the elevated roadway, that's the Gardiner Expressway, which for most of its length runs parallel with Lake Shore Boulevard. I guess for its entire length it does, but they're not always right next to each other. In fact, in some places they're on top of each other. Later in the video you'll see I'll be riding underneath the Gardiner. We're approaching Lower Spadina Avenue, which is the southern extension of Spadina. Like I mentioned, the southern area of Toronto was extended from the original shoreline. So when they did that, they had these streets that, didn't reach all the way down to the water, so they extended them. And many of them have the lower tacked onto the front of the street name, so you still know, what street it is. But my guess is they couldn't just simply continue to call it Spadina, because with the way that the numbers of the properties that are located on it, the numbers go up sequentially as you go north, so you can't go lower than 0 with your numbers. So here for a portion we'll be going directly underneath the Gardiner. Now somewhere back there, Lake Shore Boulevard, that's going in the westbound direction, somehow it ended up over on the other side of the Gardiner over, kind of further over to the left. So it's out of view now, but right now we're directly underneath the Gardiner Expressway. And this street we're about to cross is called Reese Street. And if we were to turn left onto it, which we would have had to have done about 100 meters back or so, there's a sort of an off-ramp. That would take you pretty much to the entrance into the Rogers Center or Sky Dome or CN Tower. Those two buildings are right next to each other. In fact, if I tilt the camera over this way while we wait for this traffic light, you can see the base of the CN Tower, sort of right to the right of the one-way street arrow, and then if I tilt you over this way, you can see the bottom of the Rogers Center. It originally was called the Sky Dome until the Rogers Corporation purchased the building and renamed it. I always thought Sky Dome was a really good name though, so I prefer to go with that name when I'm referring to it. So here's our traffic light. So as I go through this intersection, I need to sort of stay to the left because I don't want to go up that ramp, because that ramp that's over to the right, that will take me up onto the Gardiner Expressway, which is the roadway that's directly above us, and bikes are not allowed on there. There's no sign saying so, but trust me, bikes are not allowed up there. So now we're just about at Lower Simcoe, similar to Spadina. Simcoe is a street that runs north-south that had to be extended down into this area once the land was sort of expanded. I believe a lot of this land here was originally, or not originally, but when it was first developed into land, it was just sort of an industrial area. It was factories and rail yards and different things like that. So it was eventually, the industry was kind of shut down in this area, and it was transformed into a neighborhood where a lot of people live. And as part of that, of course, they went through a massive transformation. So here, technically we're actually going to be getting, you can see that Lake Shore Boulevard is sort of come back together. You can see the westbound traffic over on the left there. But technically up ahead, we're actually coming off of Lake Shore Boulevard, because Lake Shore Boulevard, heading in the east direction, there's a portion that doesn't exist. There's a portion, in other words, there's a portion of Lake Shore Boulevard which is a one-way street that only goes in the west direction. So this street here is called Harbor Street that we're getting onto. So I'm gonna move over one more lane, so I'll be in the far right curb lane. We're just crossing York Street here. Now, Harbor does have this multi-use trail that's over there to my right, which I'm electing not to ride on today. The reason for that is that I wanted to give a tour of Lake Shore Boulevard sort of from end to end, which this is part 2 in that. And running parallel to Lake Shore Boulevard, there is the Waterfront Trail, which is a very common cycling route. But I wanted to keep this video to show you the road and not the trail, because I've already shown you the trail in other videos in the past. We're just crossing Bay Street here, and if you were to turn to the right, that would take you down to the water, of course, but right beside the water there is the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal, which is the terminal where you can take a ferry over to Toronto Islands. This next intersection here is Yonge Street, and Yonge Street is the middle divider of the city of Toronto. So up to this point we've been riding on Lake Shore Boulevard West, but after I cross, I'll then be on Lake Shore Blvd East. I mean, I guess technically back there I was actually riding on Harbor Street, but prior to that I was on, at the beginning of the video, for example, I was on Lake Shore Boulevard West, but I'm now crossed to the eastern side of the city of Toronto. So yeah, now we're right back again beside the Gardiner Expressway. As I'm riding, I can smell the fragrance of processed sugar. That's because the Red Path Sugar Factory is located a few blocks over to the right from here, down by the water. The waterfront trail runs right up along beside that sugar factory. It's a pretty big operation, and when it's running, you can, it's probably always running, but you can certainly smell the odors coming from the factory, and I guess it also depends on the direction of the wind. So now we're about to cross Lower Jarvis Street. And once again, if I were to be in the far left lane here, that would take me onto the Gardiner Expressway East. But I don't want to go up there because that's not for bikes and it's not a very safe place to be. The speed limit on the Gardiner, I think, is 90 kilometers per hour. Lake Shore Boulevard, at least here, is only 60. The traffic right now on Lake Shore Boulevard is a lot quieter than you'd usually expect for any time of the day, really, but the reason everything's so quiet right now is because we're working through the COVID-19 pandemic and we're all doing our part to social distance ourselves and eliminate our interactions with other people, and that means that a lot of things are closed and a lot of people are being encouraged to stay home as much as possible, and that means that people have a lot less places to go. Now, of course, people watching this video after it's originally been posted, they're all very aware of this reality that we're living in right now, but I do feel that it's important that I mention it in these videos just because I know that as part of my series showing all the streets of Toronto that people will inevitably watch these videos after they've been posted, when hopefully COVID-19 is a distant memory of the past. We're now at Lower Sherbourne Street. Sherbourne is a street that has protected bike lanes on it. I've made a video tour showing that, where I rode basically from just a little bit north of Bloor all the way down to a block or so to the right of here. If you haven't seen that video already, I'll put a link in the description below. So up ahead you can see we'll once again be going underneath the Gardiner Expressway. And you'll also notice that there's quite a bit of construction. You can see some wood and things that are built up around the edges of the pillars that are holding up the highway. That's because the Gardiner right now is going under a rebuild project. And further along you'll understand better why that's necessary, because the Gardiner is in really rough shape. So yeah, like I mentioned, this road's a lot quieter than it usually would be. So in my mission to film video tours of virtually all the streets of Toronto, or all the major streets of Toronto, this is a perfect opportunity for me to come out and film a street like Lake Shore Boulevard, because under normal conditions, this is the sort of road that I would hate to ride my bike on, but right now there's a very minimal amount of traffic, so it's really not that bad. So we're now at Parliament Street, which Parliament curls. It's sort of it's a north-south street if you turn left, but if you turn right, it sort of curls and heads parallel to Lake Shore Boulevard, and I believe it becomes Queens Quay, which is an east-west street through the kind of the furthest south east-west street in the downtown core. The temperature today is around 6 or 7 degrees Celsius. I think it's fairly warm. It's nice and sunny. There's not any clouds in the sky, so it's a nice blue sky, a nice day to be out enjoying the spring weather. It's been rather cold lately. We had a couple weeks of fairly warm weather back sort of at the very beginning of April or maybe the very end of March. But in the last couple weeks, it's been really cold again. We actually had some snow flurries in the air a couple days ago. They weren't really no snow that actually accumulated, at least not here in the city, but there was actually snow that you could see in the air. So yeah, as you're riding underneath these pillars for the Gardiner, look at how deteriorated and rusted some of the concrete is. There's big chunks of it missing. Apparently there's pieces that fall off sometimes and hit cars. I wouldn't want that to happen when I'm riding my bike. Thankfully I'm wearing a helmet though, but I don't think that would do too much good. A big giant clump of concrete fell on me. But yeah, look over on the left, you can see some big sections where there's exposed rebar and big sections of concrete missing. So it's well overdue for that revitalization work, and in fact they're actually rerouting it in the process of doing this work. There's a big debate that happened in Toronto politics about 5 years ago or so, deciding what exactly they were going to do. There was kind of three options. One of them was to rebuild the Gardiner exactly as it was. There was a second option, which was much less expensive, which was to remove the Gardiner, which is something that a lot of other cities around the world have done. They've gotten rid of their 1950s era elevated expressways because cities are for people, not for moving cars. And the third option was to rebuild the Gardiner, but to rebuild it in a slightly different configuration, which made better use of the land, and it kind of opened up a portion of land that was otherwise kind of not very accessible. They called that third option the hybrid option, and that was the option that they ultimately went with, even though it had the biggest price tag of all the others. So yeah, look at the exposed rebar on these pillars here. Definitely in rough condition. So over on the right, you can see there's some water over there. That's called the Keating Channel. That's the lower portion of the Don River. The Don River is a river which pretty much flows in the south direction, but once it gets down here, it makes a right turn, sort of artificially. They've rerouted the Don River, and it flows through this Keating Channel over here. And the area to the south of the Keating Channel is called the Portlands, and it's a part of the city that's still very industrial. There's a lot of stuff down there that's relating to various different industries. There, there's big ships and things that dock down there. So we're now at a street that's called the Don Roadway, which will take you into the Portlands. I should mention a little bit back there, we went past a street called Cherry Street, and if we had turned right on there, that would have also taken us into the Portlands. And at the end of Cherry Street, there's Cherry Beach, which is, right on Lake Ontario. And then if you were to turn left there, you go through, basically you'd rejoin a portion of the waterfront trail that would take you along that southern part of, very southern part of the shoreline over there. And again, in my videos where I've filmed the waterfront trail, that's the route that I would have taken. So if you haven't seen that one already, I'll provide a link in the description below. Up ahead on the right, you can see a big stack, big concrete smokestack. That was for an old incinerator that was built here for burning up the Toronto garbage. It's no longer in use anymore. Our garbage goes to landfill. Now it's kind of out of frame from here, but further over to the right, there's another stack that's similar, except it's quite a bit taller, and that's for the Hearn generating station, which is an old coal-fired power plant. That also no longer operates. All of the coal-fired power plants in Ontario have been decommissioned. So over on the left you see we're going next to a big ramp. That's the very end of the Gardiner Expressway. It sort of comes down to ground level and it fades into Lake Shore Boulevard East. This area of Lake Shore Boulevard is dominated by film studios. We pass one back on the left which is called Cinespace Film Studios. Toronto has quite a big film industry. The film industry is quite important to the city of Toronto. There's a lot of movies that are filmed here. They usually will disguise Toronto to look like other cities like New York City or Chicago or even just places that aren't even cities. So they film a lot of stuff, on location around the city, but they also will have sets and things that are built inside of these big, large sound studio buildings that are down here by the waterfront. Up on the left, there's a film studio. You can see the black sign for it. It says Revival Film Studios. And up on the right, behind this fence, is Studio City, which is where among other things, the TV show Kim's Convenience, that's where their sound stages, their filming studios are. The actual Kim's Convenience exterior location is located on Queen Street. But most of the actual filming of the show, I believe, is filmed inside that studio back there. Up ahead on the left, you can see some concrete pillars, which are holding up nothing. I believe originally the Gardiner Expressway used to come all the way out this far to the east, but at some point they decided to decommission it. But they left those pillars there as a reminder of the past. The intersection that's up ahead is Leslie Street. If you were to turn right, that's sort of the end of the Portlands. So if I was riding that other route that goes along beside the waterfront, on the waterfront trail, that route is routed up along Leslie Street and rejoins a little path that runs next to Lake Shore Boulevard up ahead on the right. Basically, the cyclists that you can see up ahead on the right, those are cyclists that have curved back up north, and they're going to continue their way heading east along the multi-use trail that's over on the right. Which is, again, that's normally where I would ride, but my tour today is of Lake Shore Boulevard, not of the Martin Goodman Trail. So We're doing it like a car would do it, riding on the actual road. But if I were to turn right onto Leslie, that would take me down to the Leslie Street Spit, which is also known as Tommy Tongson Park, which is a really interesting park that I hope to be able to film a tour of someday. That facility that you can see over on the right that has all those red panels and sort of all those poles and wires and things, that's a streetcar yard. That's one of the places where the Toronto streetcars are taken at night and when they're off duty to be worked on and to be cleaned and to do all that kind of stuff. That all happens on the other side of that barricade that you can see over on the right. Over on the left, we're going past a big Canada Post warehouse. I assume it's one of the main sorting facilities for the Toronto area. Up on the right, we're going past, behind those gray and blue panels, that's the Ashbridges Bay wastewater treatment plant. That's where the water that goes through our sewers eventually ends up and gets cleaned before it's put back into the lake. A lot of the city of Toronto has combined sewers, and not a lot of the city of Toronto, but certain parts of the city of Toronto have combined sewers, which means the sanitary waste and the storm sewer waste go into the same pipe, which means it all has to be treated. And of course the Ashbridges Bay facility is named after the bay that we're just crossing that goes over to the right here. That's the Ashbridges Bay. So up on the right is Ashbridges Bay Park, which is a park which sort of goes along beside that bay. And Ashbridges Bay Park also sort of morphs into Woodbine Beach, which is a nice place to come swimming here in Toronto in the summer. Very big, giant sandy beach. The land that's over to my left is part of Woodbine Park, which is a portion of Woodbine Park. Used to be a racehorse track, the Woodbine Raceway, but it's been redeveloped now into a park, and the portion up ahead, which is where you can see the buildings, that also used to be part of the Woodbine Raceway as well. The street we're crossing here is called Northern Dancer Boulevard. And now you can see that the sign on the right said Woodbine Beach Park, so Woodbine Beach is just over to the right of here. And just up ahead, Lake Shore Boulevard East curves and starts heading to the north, and somewhere in that curve Lake Shore Boulevard terminates and becomes Woodbine Avenue. Earlier in the year, I filmed a video where I gave a narrated tour of Woodbine, where I started up at the north end and I rode down, and I ended that video just a little bit over to the right of where I am right now. That concrete structure that you can see up on the right is the Donald D. Somerville Olympic pool that has never hosted any Olympics, but it is Olympic sized. And so it's like kind of built on the upper story of that structure, and the bottom structure is for the change rooms and stuff. So it's an outdoor pool. Here you can see as we make the curve, Lake Shore Boulevard has now ended, and we are now riding on Woodbine Avenue. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed joining me on part 2 of my narrated tour of Lake Shore Boulevard East. If you watched all the way to the end of the video, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.